Tonight, we drift back to the moment when a single spark, small, elegant, almost innocent, set the ancient world on a path toward ruin. The fire dims, the air settles, and in that hush we watch a golden apple fall into the wrong hands. Gods turn their faces, pride stirs like a storm, and somewhere far away the fate of Troy begins to tremble. If this kind of storytelling brings you inner peace, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it truly brings you peace. And let me know in the comments where in the world are you listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always strangely comforting to know who else is out there closing their eyes to the same story. So settle in. Let the world grow quiet and let's dream together for a while. Let the night settle around you. Let the world grow quiet, the way it does when old stories rise up from beneath the dust of time. For the tale we are about to enter is not a single story, not a single battle, not even a single generation's tragedy. It is a chain of events, delicate, fragile and catastrophic, that began long before the first spear struck Trojan soil. The Trojan War was not born on the battlefield. It was born in a moment of insult. At a wedding where every god had gathered, one goddess was denied entry. Eris, the spirit of discord, arrived uninvited, her silence more dangerous than wrath. From her hand fell a golden apple, its inscription simple, almost playful, to the fairest. But the gods are not known for humility. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite each reached for it, and in that gesture, the shape of destiny bent toward fire. What followed was not merely rivalry, it was the slow turning of a cosmic key. A shepherd prince would be dragged into a divine quarrel. A queen would abandon her home for a foreign shore. An oath made in peace would awaken like a sleeping giant, calling kings and heroes from every corner of Greece. And high above them all, the gods would choose sides, playing out their own desires through mortal lives. Tonight, we begin that descent. Not into myth alone, but into memory. Into the echoes of a war that defined an age, reshaped a world, and left behind stories that still shimmer in the ruins of history. In the age before the Great War, when God still wandered the earth with the ease of wind through trees, there came a celebration so magnificent it seemed the world itself paused to watch. The wedding of Peleus and Thetis was meant to be a moment of perfect harmony, a rare joining of mortal and divine, blessed by Zeus, attended by every honoured presence upon Olympus. Music drifted across the sky. Laughter echoed like distant thunder. The gods reclined in splendour, their immortal faces warmed by a sense of festivity rarely seen in their turbulent histories. But even in a hall of brilliance, a single absence can cast a long shadow. Eris, the goddess of discord, had not been invited. No one wanted strife at a wedding, and she embodied it too completely. Yet to exclude a goddess is to wound her pride, and divine pride, larger and heavier than any mortal emotion, cannot remain silent. She arrived not with a storm or shout, but with a quiet fury, her presence curling around the edges of the feast like a chill wind creeping through a warm room. In her hand she carried a single golden apple. It glowed with an otherworldly radiance, smooth as polished sunlight, its inscription etched with simplicity. To the fairest. A gift or a weapon? It didn't matter. Eris understood the nature of gods. Vanity was their deepest fault, and she needed only to place the apple among them to ignite a fire no mortal city could ever hope to contain. She let the apple slip from her fingers. It rolled across the banquet floor, capturing the light, then stopped as 3 goddesses leaned toward it. Hera, queen of the heavens, whose pride was as vast as the sky she ruled. Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, sharp as strategy itself. Aphrodite, radiant embodiment of desire, whose beauty could bend the hearts of gods and mortals alike. 3 divine gazes met over the apple, and the harmony of the wedding fractured with a single breath. Words were exchanged, then accusations, then inevitably demands. Each claimed the apple, each asserted her superiority. And Zeus, wise enough to recognize that no answer he gave would ever be forgiven, refused to judge them. The king of the gods, ruler of storms and fate, stepped back from the conflict, leaving the burden of choice to another. He chose Paris. A shepherd prince of Troy, living quietly in the shadow of Mount Ida, unaware that the gods were about to place history upon his shoulders. Paris was known for fairness, for gentleness, for a kind spirit, but it was precisely these qualities that made him vulnerable. He would not withstand the storm that approached him, yet this moment still lay ahead. For now, the wedding hall buzzed with divine tension. Beneath the music, beneath the laughter that continued hesitantly, every god sensed the shift. A seed had been planted, small, gleaming, almost harmless, and yet its roots reached into the future, twisting fate toward one of the greatest tragedies the world would ever know. Eris watched it unfold. There was no triumph in her gaze, only certainty. She had set the discord in motion. The rest would come as naturally as seasons changing or stars drifting across the sky. The gods returned to their feasting, but the warmth was gone. Hera's jaw was set in cold determination. Athena's eyes flickered with a strategist's fury. Aphrodite's smile tightened like a drawn bowstring. None of them would forget the insult, and none would forgive it. The golden apple lay in the centre of their rivalry like an omen. Its light pulsed gently, as if marking the first heartbeat of a story that would stretch from Olympus to Sparta, from Troy's proud walls to the ashes that would one day bury them. The war had not yet begun. No ships had been summoned. No swords had been forged. But in the shimmering glow of a single apple, the fate of empires had been written. Far from Olympus, where the gods argued over vanity and power, Paris lived a quieter life among the slopes of Mount Ida. He tended sheep, breathed the soft winds of the mountain valleys, and lived in a peace that felt almost out of place in a world ruled by divine impulse. The Greeks often imagined him as gentle, thoughtful, perhaps too gentle, too thoughtful for the weight of fate that was about to descend upon him. For Paris did not yet know that the quarrel of 3 goddesses had chosen him as its judge, nor that the choice he made in innocence would one day burn a city to the ground. When Hermes arrived to fetch him, the air itself seemed to pause. The messenger god descended in a shimmer of light, his winged sandals brushing the earth without bending a blade of grass. Paris, startled, bowed instinctively, but Hermes lifted him with a gesture both kind and urgent. A decision must be made, he explained, one that only you can render. The shepherd prince, still unaware of his true lineage as a son of Troy, agreed with the humility of someone who did not yet understand what it means to be chosen by gods. Hermes led him to a secluded glade, quiet, perfumed, timeless. There, waiting with expressions that hid their storming hearts, stood Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. The golden apple glowed softly in the grass between them. Paris hesitated. Mortals do not judge gods. Mortals do not stand between their rivalries. Mortals do not survive such moments unchanged. But the goddesses smiled, each concealing the sharpness of divine ambition beneath silk soft voices. Hera approached first. Her presence carried the weight of a throne, the quiet force of sovereignty. She promised Paris the kingship of all mankind, the power to rule nations, to shape empires, to command respect and fear in equal measure. She spoke of thrones and legacies, of victories carved into the bones of history. "Choose me," she murmured, "and the world will kneel at your feet." Athena came next, her gaze sharp, her voice calm but edged with intensity. She offered not rule, but greatness, victory in battle, mastery of strategy, undying honour. She promised Paris a place among the immortals, not as a god, but as a hero spoken of for centuries. Wisdom, glory, triumph. These were the gifts she set before him. "Choose me," she said, "and your name will never fade." Last came Aphrodite. Her presence did not impose or command. It softened the air around her, warmed it, scented it with something like dawn after rain. She offered no kingdoms, no victories. She offered love. She promised Paris the heart of the most beautiful woman alive, Helen of Sparta, whose radiance was said to outshine even the goddesses. Aphrodite spoke not of power or destiny, but of desire, companionship, sweetness. "Choose me," she whispered, "and the world's most beautiful woman will be yours." Paris's heart wavered. Hera's offer held power. Athena's held glory. But Aphrodite's held something more dangerous than either: longing. Desire does not rise from reason. It rises from the unguarded corners of the soul. And Paris, untrained in politics or war, unprepared for the weight of myth, found himself drawn to the promise of beauty and affection, a promise that felt personal, intimate, almost human in a world of divine ambition. When he placed the apple in Aphrodite's hand, the air shivered. Hera's eyes hardened like ice. Athena's expression tightened into cold resolve. Aphrodite's smile deepened, gentle and victorious. In that moment, the gods chose sides. Hera would never forgive Paris. Athena would never forget the insult. And Aphrodite would hold Paris under her protection, binding herself to the fate of Troy. The shepherd prince looked around, unaware of the storm he had just unleashed. The choice felt small, almost harmless. But in the quiet glade where three goddesses stood waiting, destiny shifted its course. The seeds of war had begun to sprout, invisible yet unstoppable. Paris returned to Mount Ida changed, not visibly, not outwardly, but in the invisible way a life changes when it has unknowingly taken the first step toward catastrophe. The gods had made their offers. Paris had made his choice, and Helen, far away in Sparta, felt the first faint tremor of a future she could not yet see. The war had begun long before the armies gathered. It began here, in a glade of soft grass, under the gaze of three immortals, in the hand of a shepherd holding a golden apple. In Sparta, where the sunlight fell bright on white stone, and the winds carried the scent of the sea, Helen lived in a palace that seemed almost too small to contain her legend. The Greeks said she was the most beautiful woman alive, beauty so luminous it felt dangerous, as though the gods themselves had poured a portion of their radiance into her mortal form. Yet for all her brightness, she lived in a world shaped by human obligation. She was a queen, a wife to Menelaus, bound by alliances and customs she did not choose. It was into this world that Paris arrived, guided by Aphrodite and destiny itself. He came not as a conqueror, but as a guest, welcomed according to the sacred laws of hospitality. Menelaus treated him with honour, offering him a place at his table, a space within his halls, as any Greek king would do. Hospitality was a sacred bond, one protected by Zeus himself, and to betray it was to tear at the fabric of society. Yet beneath the courtesy and wine, an invisible tension stirred. Helen, living within the rhythm of royal duty, must have sensed something in Paris, something unfamiliar, something drawn to her with the soft inevitability of a tide returning to shore. And Paris, dazzled, carried with him both Aphrodite's promise and his own blossoming desire. Whether Helen returned his feelings, whether she chose him freely, whether she was enchanted or abducted, these questions were never settled. Greek poets told the story differently, shaped by their own beliefs about women, fate, and divine intervention. But one thing is certain: Helen left Sparta. Some say she fled willingly, seeking a different life in Troy, carried by a love she believed destiny had placed in her path. Others say Paris stole her, placing her aboard his ship against the cries of palace guards and the cracking of Spartan oaths. And some insist Aphrodite herself clouded her mind, drawing her irresistibly toward the man she had been promised. No matter the truth, the effect was the same. A queen vanished, a marriage broke, a king's honour shattered, and across the sea the spark of 1,000 grudges finally caught flame. When Menelaus discovered Helen gone, the palace fell into a silence thick with disbelief. The great beauty of Sparta had crossed the threshold of loyalty, and whether by choice or by force, her departure violated the sacred hospitality Paris had been granted. It was not merely a personal insult, it was a crime against the gods. Menelaus did not rage immediately. The Greeks believed that grief often moved more slowly, more heavily than anger. But when the truth settled into his bones, he turned to the only safeguard ever crafted for this very moment, the oath of Tyndareus. Years before Helen chose Menelaus as her husband, she had been sought by dozens of kings and heroes across Greece. Her beauty could spark war even then. Tyndareus, her mortal father, feared that choosing one suitor would cause the rest to turn on him, igniting civil war. It was Odysseus, clever even in youth, who offered the solution. Every suitor must swear a sacred oath to defend the chosen husband against any who threatened the marriage. Each man agreed. They swore by horse and spear, by hearth and sky, by the honour of their names. Most believed the oath would never be needed. But now it was. Menelaus called upon the oath, and the kings of Greece responded, not because they cared for Helen, but because they were bound by their own words. Agamemnon, king of kings, stepped forward to lead the expedition. Odysseus was dragged from his fields, Ajax from his training grounds, and Nestor from his wise counsels. Across the land, black ships were prepared, armour polished, sacrifices offered. And from the hidden island of Scyros, Achilles, still young, still bright with prophecy, was discovered and brought to join the gathering storm. Paris and Helen sailed toward Troy under calm skies, unaware of the army rising behind them. But the gods saw it. Zeus watched with distant eyes. Hera's anger smouldered like banked coals. Athena's silence grew cold. Aphrodite, protective and defiant, wrapped her beauty around the couple like a fragile shield. The war had not yet begun, but the oath had awakened. And Greece was preparing to move as one. Across the Greek world, the call to war spread like a long, resonant note carried on the wind. Messengers travelled dusty roads, ships unfurled their sails, and kings who had once lived comfortably within their own borders now felt the weight of an oath stirring beneath their feet. The matter was no longer Helen alone. It was honour, obligation, a sacred vow echoing across years, demanding to be fulfilled. And as the summons reached every corner of the land, the greatest names of an age began to rise. Among them was Achilles, still young, still half-shadowed by prophecy. His mother Thetis knew the truth of his fate. If he sailed for Troy, his glory would become eternal, but his life would be brief. If he stayed, he would grow old and forgotten. The choice was cruel, and she tried to hide him, disguising him among the daughters of King Lycomedes on the island of Syros. But fate has a way of finding those it marks. Odysseus, whose cunning was already near legend, arrived at the court with gifts for maidens, fine cloths, jewels, trinkets, and one weapon hidden among them. When Achilles instinctively reached for the blade, the disguise shattered. His destiny called to him, and the world's greatest warrior stepped into the light. Odysseus himself did not join willingly. He had woven a quiet life for himself in Ithaca, with Penelope at his side and a newborn son in his arms. To break that peace felt like tearing a warm cloak from his shoulders, exposing him to the cold machinery of war. But the oath bound him as surely as any chain. When Agamemnon's envoys arrived, Odysseus feigned madness, ploughing the shoreline with ox and donkey, sowing salt in the furrows. Yet Palamedes, sharp-eyed, uncompromising, placed the infant Telemachus before the plough. Odysseus swerved, and the deception fell away. Duty reclaimed him. Ajax of Salamis responded with a simpler, more direct force. Massive, disciplined, a warrior forged from the straightforward logic of strength, he prepared his armies without hesitation. The Greeks admired Ajax not for charm or cunning, but for his reliability. In a war shaped by divine whims, he was a rare anchor, solid, unwavering, a man who could be trusted to stand his ground even when gods themselves turned the tide. And then there was Agamemnon, brother of Menelaus, king of Mycenae, ambitious, powerful, and eager to command the greatest force the world had ever seen. It was he who would lead, not because the gods chose him, but because he chose himself. Ambition, like a quiet flame, burned within him. The war offered a chance not only to avenge his brother's honour, but to carve his own immortality into history. Yet before the fleet could sail, the winds refused to rise. The Greeks gathered at Aulis, thousands of ships waiting restlessly in still water. Whispers spread. Artemis was offended. Some said Agamemnon had boasted too loudly of his hunting skill. Others said he had killed a sacred deer. In myths, the slightest slight to the gods could tip the balance of destiny. And now the goddess demanded a price. Her demand was Iphigenia, Agamemnon's daughter. The moment felt carved from pure tragedy, a fracture in the heart of the war before it had even begun. Agamemnon hesitated, torn between paternal love and the weight of thousands of men waiting for wind. To refuse meant the army would disperse, honour would break, and Greece would fracture. To obey meant sacrificing innocence to appease divine pride. The Greeks believed that such choices revealed the true cost of war long before the first spear was lifted. In the end, Iphigenia was brought to Aulis, Some say by deceit, others say with acceptance. The altar was prepared. The goddess received her offering, and the winds rose, gentle at first, then strong enough to fill the sails of 1,000 black ships. With that wind, Greece exhaled as one body. The army gathered, heroes with gleaming armour, kings with long memories, archers, spearmen, charioteers. Ships lined the horizon, their painted prows like silent promises. The sea, once still, churned beneath the weight of destiny. Achilles boarded his ship, unaware that the sand of Troy would one day drink his blood. Odysseus took the helm of his vessel, already planning strategies he did not yet know he would need. Ajax prepared for war the way a mountain prepares for a storm, without fear, without complaint, simply accepting the path before him. The gods watched from above, their own rivalries settling into place. Some leaned toward the Greeks, others toward Troy. The board was set, the pieces were moving, and across the wine-dark sea, Troy waited, its walls strong, its princes unaware of the tide approaching. The greatest army of the age was finally on the move. When the Greek fleet finally reached the shores of Troy, it did not arrive like a single stroke of lightning, but like a gathering storm. One ship at a time, then 100, then 1,000, their black sails rising and falling against the horizon. The Trojans, watching from their high walls, must have felt the shape of destiny settling around them, heavy as a hand on the shoulder. The war had begun, yet the great clash sung by poets would not come for years. The first 9 years unfolded instead as a slow grind of raids, skirmishes, sacrifices, and shifting divine interference. The Greeks built their camp upon the beach, driving stakes into sand that had never known such industry. Fires were lit, shields stacked, tents raised in long rows that gleamed like bronze fields under the sun. Life reshaped itself into the rhythm of waiting. Waiting for supplies, for orders, for omens, for the gods to choose their moments. The sea behind them was both safety and prison, the wide plain before them, both opportunity and danger. Troy did not answer immediately. The Trojans were skilled fighters, cautious and proud, and they understood that a sudden rush would only scatter lives without shifting fate. So the war settled into something more ancient than glory. Survival. The Greeks raided nearby islands and coastal towns to secure food, horses and treasure. They struck villages loyal to Troy, seizing what they needed and burning what they could not carry. These campaigns, rarely told, seldom sung, built the brutality that fed the larger war. Achilles, young and burning with talent, excelled in these early raids. His name became a whisper among allies and enemies alike, a hero whose presence meant victory, whose absence meant concern. He struck swift as lightning, returning with spoils and prisoners, asserting Greek dominance along the coast. Yet it was in these raids that the seeds of later conflict were sown. Among the captives he brought back was Briseis, a woman whose fate would one day fracture the Greek army itself. While Achilles conquered, Agamemnon claimed his own captive, Chryseis, daughter of a priest of Apollo. When her father came to ransom her, offering gold and humility, Agamemnon refused. It was arrogance, small in the moment, devastating in consequence. Apollo heard the priest's prayers and descended upon the Greek camp with plague. Day after day, arrows of disease fell invisibly from the god's unseen bow. Smoke rose from funeral pyres. Horses collapsed in the sand. Warriors who had survived combat withstood nothing against fever. It was here that the Greeks first tasted the truth of war, with the gods involved. Victories on the battlefield meant nothing if Olympus tilted the scales. In councils beneath a flickering torchlight, the Greeks argued. Odysseus urged diplomacy. Nestor reminded them of honour. Achilles demanded Agamemnon return the girl to save the army. Agamemnon bristled at being commanded by a younger warrior. Pride clashed with necessity. Words became weapons. The plague raged. At last, Agamemnon relented, sending Chryseis back under Odysseus's escort, but at a cost that would fracture the Greeks more deeply than any Trojan spear could. He seized Briseis from Achilles as compensation. In a single moment, the war lost its greatest weapon. Achilles withdrew from battle, refusing to fight under a king who treated him with disdain. His myrmidons laid down their arms. His voice fell silent, and the Greeks felt the absence like a wound. Meanwhile, Troy strengthened. Hector rose as the city's shield, moving among his people with quiet authority. He rallied their spirits, expanded their defences, led them in measured strikes that pushed the Greeks back toward their ships. Where Achilles was fire, Hector was stone, steady, unbreakable, bound to his duty not by glory but by love for his family and city. The gods grew bolder in their interference. Hera and Athena encouraged Greek attacks. Apollo and Aphrodite shielded Troy. At times the battlefield shifted not by mortal strength, but by the unseen hands of Olympus. Winds changed, shadows moved, spears found their marks or missed by inches, because divine wills crossed or aligned in the air. Years passed like this. Battles that gained little ground, nights filled with funerals, days spent rebuilding what had burned. Heroes on both sides grew weary. The Greeks realized that victory would not come quickly. The Trojans realized that resistance would demand everything. The war had begun in chaos. It would take 9 years of struggle before the world truly understood what it meant. As the war dragged into its 10th year, a heaviness settled over the Greek camp, an exhaustion made from sand, smoke, and unbroken struggle. Men fought not for victory, but for survival. Heroes bled for causes they no longer remembered clearly. Yet beneath this long fatigue, a single conflict brewed that would reshape the entire course of the war. It began not with spears or walls, but with pride, fragile, burning, impossible to contain. Achilles sat apart from the camp, the sea breathing in slow waves behind him. His anger had become a second presence, silent, patient, coiled like a serpent at his side. Ever since Agamemnon seized Briseis, the girl Achilles had taken in war and come to cherish, the hero had withdrawn not only from battle, but from the very heart of the Greek cause. His tent stood untouched by dust, his armour gleaming beneath cloth, his spear resting idle. To the Greeks, he was a missing son. Without his light, everything dimmed. Agamemnon, meanwhile, struggled to maintain order. Without Achilles, Greek morale broke like clay in a storm. Raids faltered. Trojans pressed harder. The tide shifted, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Hector sensed the weakness and moved with confidence, leading his warriors in sudden charges that sent Greek lines staggering backward. The Trojans, once cornered behind their walls, now surged across the plain with renewed purpose. But the gods too watched this rift with interest. Hera and Athena, who favoured the Greeks, seethed at Achilles' silence. Apollo and Aphrodite rejoiced at Troy's resurgence. Zeus, who alone held the ultimate balance of fate, allowed events to unspool as they must, neither rushing nor restraining them. Divine wills brushed against mortal lives like invisible winds, shaping decisions men believed were their own. As the Trojans advanced, the Greeks came dangerously close to disaster. One attack drove them back to the very edge of their ships, those black vessels that were both their only shelter and their only escape. Flames licked the timbers of a few, burning bright against the dusk. Shouts rose, shields clattered, waves hissed beneath fire. The war, which had seemed endless, suddenly felt as though it could end in a single night. Patroclus watched all this with a heart pulled in two directions. He loved Achilles deeply, more than a companion, more than a brother. But he also loved the Greeks. He could not bear to see them slaughtered while he remained idle. So he approached Achilles with a plea shaped from desperation. His words were gentle, but their urgency cut through the stillness. He begged Achilles to return to battle, even for a single day. When Achilles refused, still wounded by Agamemnon's insult, Patroclus made another request, to go in Achilles' place, wearing his armour so that the Trojans would believe the great warrior had returned. Achilles hesitated. It was a moment that stretched like a long shadow on the ground. The Greeks believed Achilles knew, somewhere deep in the marrow of fate, that granting this request would cost him something priceless. But Patroclus was unshakable in his resolve. Achilles relented. He placed his armour on Patroclus' shoulders, the weight of bronze becoming the weight of destiny. When Patroclus entered the battlefield, the Trojans faltered. His silhouette, shining beneath the sun, fooled them. They believed Achilles had returned, and fear rippled through their ranks. The Greeks surged forward, driving the Trojans back with renewed vigour. Even Hector withdrew at first, sensing the shift in the air. But glory often blinds those who taste it. Patroclus pushed too far, carried by the tide of battle, by the thrill of victory, by the hope of saving his comrades. He reached the walls of Troy itself, something forbidden even to Achilles. And there, at the height of this momentum, Hector met him. Their clash was brief, tragic, inevitable. When Hector struck Patroclus down, the battlefield grew still. The dying warrior spoke Achilles' name with his final breath, warning Hector of the doom now approaching. The message struck deeper than the spear. News travelled through the Greek camp like a cold wind. Achilles rose from his tent and felt the world narrow to a single point. Patroclus was dead. His grief became a storm. His sorrow became a blade. His rage became a force the Greeks had never before witnessed. The war had been brutal before. Now it would become something else. A reckoning shaped by a hero who had nothing left to lose. When Achilles learned of Patroclus' death, the world around him seemed to fold inward. The sea wind lost its warmth. The murmur of the Greek camp dimmed into silence. Grief did not erupt from him in a single burst. It rose slowly, like a tide swelling beneath a darkened moon. Those who saw him that day felt as though they stood in the presence of something ancient and unstoppable, a force no longer human, yet still shaped by human pain. Thetis, his mother, came to him from the depths of the sea. She knew this moment with the sorrow of one who has watched fate stitch tragedy long before her child was born. Achilles wept into her arms, his tears salt against the salt of her skin. She held him with a tenderness the world would never see from him again. When he told her he would kill Hector, She did not protest. She only warned him of what would follow, that once Hector fell, Achilles' own death would move toward him like a shadow returning to its source. But grief had drawn him past the reach of caution. He asked for armour, and Thetis brought him a gift forged by Hephaestus himself, a shield that shimmered with the entire world carved into its surface, stars, cities, harvests, seasons, rivers, life etched in bronze for a man whose own life was narrowing into a single purpose. As Achilles strode back into battle, the Greeks felt hope surge like fire across dry grass. The Trojans, watching from afar, felt the opposite, a tremor running through their ranks that no command could steady. Achilles did not merely rejoin the war, he transformed it. Rage became his compass, leading him through the battlefield with terrifying clarity. Spears broke against him. Chariots fell beneath his charge. He moved, not like a man, but like a storm, indiscriminate, unstoppable, driven by a single wound that no victory could ever mend. The Trojans fled before him, the plain echoing with their retreat. Even the river god Scamander rose against Achilles, angered by the countless bodies clogging his waters. Waves surged, mud churned, reeds bent. Achilles fought the river itself, an image so violent and surreal that ancient storytellers spoke of it in hushed awe. Only when the gods intervened did the waters subside, leaving Achilles standing soaked and relentless, like a figure carved from fury. Hector watched all of this from the walls of Troy. His heart bore the weight of two worlds, the duty to protect his city and the dread of facing the man whose wrath could drown armies. And yet, Hector was not a hero of impulse. He was a man of responsibility, bound by love for his family, by loyalty to his people, by a sense of honour far more complex than glory. When he looked upon Achilles, he did not see an enemy alone. He saw the destiny he could not avert. Priam and Hecuba begged him to stay within the walls. Andromache, his wife, pleaded with him not to face a warrior who burned brighter and darker than any mortal should. Hector embraced her and their infant son, knowing these were the last moments he would feel such warmth. Then he walked out of the gates, alone. When Achilles approached, their meeting felt like the convergence of two different understandings of heroism. One born of vengeance, the other of duty. Initially, Hector's resolve faltered, and he ran, circling the walls of Troy 3 times with Achilles in pursuit. It was not cowardice, it was the sudden weight of mortality pressing down. But at last he stopped, finding a stillness within himself that quieted the fear. He stood his ground. The duel was swift, fierce and final. Hector fought with a courage that did not waver, with skill honed through years of defending Troy. But Achilles carried something heavier than skill. He carried the force of grief turned into violence. When Hector fell, the world seemed to exhale. Achilles, consumed by rage, tied Hector's body to his chariot and dragged it across the plain, a sight so brutal that even the gods looked away. Yet the story's most human moment came not from Achilles, nor from Hector, but from Priam, the aging king of Troy. Guided by Hermes, he entered the Greek camp at night. He knelt before Achilles, kissed the hands that had killed his son, and begged for Hector's body with a dignity that pierced even the hardest grief. Achilles softened. 2 grieving men, one who had lost a son, one who had lost a brother, shared a silence deeper than war itself. Achilles returned Hector's body. For a moment, vengeance paused. For a moment, humanity lingered. The duel was over, but its echo would shape destiny to the end. After Hector's death, The war seemed to lose its balance. The Greeks pressed forward with renewed hunger. The Trojans recoiled under the weight of their grief. Yet even in this charged landscape, destiny continued to weave its threads in ways neither side could foresee. Heroes, once pillars of strength, began to fall one by one, as though the gods themselves were thinning the world of its greatest figures before the final reckoning. The first to arrive in this new tide of blood was Penthesilea, queen of the Amazons. She came not as a conqueror, but as a warrior seeking redemption. The Greeks imagined her as a figure carved from both grace and ferocity, armour gleaming, spear poised, grief shadowing her gaze. She had killed one of her own sisters in a tragic accident, and war was the only path she knew that might cleanse her soul. Troy welcomed her with open arms. Her presence breathed fire into the weary hearts of its defenders. When Penthesilea rode into battle, the plain erupted with awe. She fought with a precision and fury that stunned even seasoned warriors. Achilles, watching from afar, felt something unfamiliar stir in him, respect, perhaps even admiration. Yet fate does not pause for admiration. Their confrontation was inevitable. They met at the height of battle, two brilliant forces colliding like storms crossing paths. Penthesilea struck with the desperation of someone who wished for an ending. Achilles countered with the instinct of someone whose legend had grown too heavy to lay down. When his spear found its mark, she fell silently, her beauty revealed in death in a way that stunned him. Ancient storytellers whispered that Achilles loved her in the same instant he killed her. A cruel, fleeting tenderness sparked too late. He lifted her body with reverence, angered when a Greek soldier mocked her death. In a rare moment of unrestrained wrath, he killed the mocker, revealing that beneath his hardened grief, humanity still flickered. Yet even Achilles could not outpace destiny forever. Not long after Penthesilea's fall, another shadow crossed the battlefield. Achilles' own. Paris, who had once been little more than a shepherd prince caught in the whims of goddesses, now stood as the instrument of Apollo's will. Guided by the unseen hand of the sun god, Paris drew his bow. The arrow he released did not fly with skill. It flew with fate. It found Achilles' one vulnerable spot, his heel, and struck him down. When Achilles fell, the world seemed to tilt. The Greeks surged around him, forming a shield of bodies and bronze to protect the hero even in death. His armour was stripped by Hector's brother, a cruel echo of the honours once given to fallen warriors. His body was returned to the camp, laid out with the reverence due to someone who had shaped the course of a decade-long war. Grief rippled across the Greek forces. Thetis rose from the sea one final time, her wail carrying the sound of a mother mourning a fate she had foreseen yet could not prevent. Funeral games were held. Hair was cut, armour polished, spears lowered. For a moment, even the gods grew silent, as though acknowledging the passing of a man who had burned so brightly that even immortals felt the heat of his existence. But the sorrow did not end there. The armour of Achilles, crafted by a god, etched with the world itself, became the prize for which two heroes contended, Odysseus and Ajax. The decision was not made by strength, but by persuasion, strategy, the cunning of words. When Odysseus won, Ajax's mind cracked beneath the shame. In a haze of madness, he slaughtered livestock, believing them to be Greek leaders. When clarity returned, and he saw only animals lying slain, he understood what he had done. That realization hollowed him. Unable to bear the weight of humiliation, Ajax took his own life. With Achilles dead, Ajax gone, and Troy still standing, the war entered a strange, mournful twilight. The Greeks had lost their fiercest warrior and their sturdiest shield. Troy had lost its greatest prince. The gods shifted uneasily, as though the board upon which they played was finally beginning to splinter. And in the distance, both sides felt destiny whisper. The end was approaching, but not yet. By the time the war reached its final years, the plain before Troy felt like a graveyard of hopes. The Greeks had lost their brightest warrior and their strongest shield. The Trojans had lost their prince, their certainty, their sense of unshakable destiny. The war no longer surged with heroic momentum. It dragged, heavy and breathless, as though both sides were trapped within the slow turning of fate. Victory seemed distant, almost impossible. And yet, in that exhaustion, a quiet spark began to flicker in the mind of Odysseus. The Greeks had learned many things in 10 years of battle, but one truth towered above all others. Troy's walls would not fall to strength alone. They soared into the sky like a challenge to the gods themselves, built with the skill of Poseidon and Apollo, fortified by time and legend. No ladder, no siege engine, no spear could breach them. What remained was deception, not a weapon of iron, but of imagination. But before deception could work, prophecy had to be satisfied. The Greeks believed that Troy would fall only when 3 conditions were met. The first required the son of Achilles, Neoptolemus, to join the war. Fierce, young, untempered, he was summoned from Syros and arrived burning with the same unyielding fire that once defined his father. He entered the war not with hesitance, but with a hunger for glory, a flame that promised both triumph and tragedy. The second condition demanded the bow of Heracles, a weapon so sacred and deadly that its very presence shifted the balance of battles. It belonged to Philoctetes, a warrior abandoned years earlier on the island of Lemnos due to a festering wound that filled the Greek camp with stench and dread. Now, realizing their mistake, the Greeks sailed to retrieve him. Philoctetes returned reluctantly, carrying not only the bow, but the bitterness of betrayal. Yet even resentment bowed to necessity. The bow's arrow would one day strike down Paris himself, ending the life that had begun the war. The third requirement whispered of the Palladium, a sacred statue of Athena hidden deep within Troy. So long as it remained within the city, Troy could not fall. Odysseus and Diomedes slipped into the city by night, silent as shadows, and stole the statue away. With this theft, the divine protection surrounding Troy weakened, leaving the city exposed in a way it had never been. Only then did Odysseus reveal the idea that would change history. A wooden horse, not small, not decorative, but towering, hollow, a shape of quiet menace disguised as surrender. Built to appear like an offering to the gods, a final gesture acknowledging Greek defeat. The Greeks would burn their tents, set sail, vanish beyond the horizon, leaving behind only the horse and a single man, a liar whose lies would carry the weight of destiny. That man was Sinon. When the Greeks abandoned the beach, hiding just beyond a nearby island, Sinon approached Troy with trembling limbs and a story crafted to pierce hearts. He claimed the Greeks had left him behind as a sacrifice, that the horse was a gift to Athena, and that to destroy it would bring ruin upon Troy. He spun his tale with such conviction that even the wisest Trojans felt their suspicions soften. The people argued. Some urged caution. Others felt triumph swelling in their chests. Cassandra, cursed with the gift of truth no one believed, warned them that death crouched within the wooden frame. Her cries went unanswered. Laocoon, priest of Apollo, hurled a spear into the horse's flank, and for a moment there was silence so deep it felt like the world holding its breath. Then serpents sent by the gods emerged from the sea, coiling around Laocoon and his sons, dragging them beneath the waves. The Trojans saw this not as warning, but as divine approval. The horse was pulled through the gates. Its wheels groaned. Its hollow belly shifted with the weight of warriors inside. And Troy, believing the war finally over, celebrated with wine and fire and song. Night fell, the city slept, the embers dimmed. And then, from within the horse, a hidden door opened. Odysseus, Menelaus, Neoptolemus, and the chosen warriors dropped silently to the ground. They moved like shadows, opening the gates for the waiting Greek army that had returned across the dark water. Torches ignited, swords glinted, footsteps multiplied. The quiet became a roar. This was the moment Troy died, not with a single blow, but with a deception that slipped through the cracks of pride and exhaustion. When the gates of Troy opened to the returning Greek army, the night itself seemed to tear apart. What had begun in silence, shadows slipping from the wooden horse, whispers moving through sleeping streets, now erupted into a storm of fire and bronze. The Greeks poured into the city like a tide long held back, their weapons catching the glow of torches, their footsteps echoing against stone that had stood proud for generations. Troy, once thought unbreakable, awakened to its ruin. The Trojans stumbled from their beds into chaos. The air filled with smoke, the smell of burning timber, the shouts of soldiers, the cries of families whose world had shifted in the space of a heartbeat. Some tried to fight, grabbing spears, swords, even furniture. Anything to stand against the force flooding through the streets. Others fled toward higher ground, temples, altars. But the Greeks had come with purpose forged over 10 relentless years, and nothing could turn them back. Priam, the aging king, made his way to the temple of Zeus, seeking refuge beneath the god's protection. He stood there, trembling, watching the flames reflected in the marble floor. But even sanctity offered no shield. Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, young, fierce, burning with an inherited fury, found him. The old king clung to the altar, speaking not as a ruler but as a father who had lost too much. Yet Neoptolemus carried the shadow of Achilles in his heart, and his strike fell without hesitation. Priam died at the place where he had sought hope, the final symbol of Troy's fading order. Elsewhere Cassandra ran through the palace halls, her voice raw with truth no one had ever believed. She saw the future in every flicker of flame, every collapsing beam. She knew this night long before it came, and yet she could not stop it. When the Greeks found her, she was dragged away to a fate as cruel as her curse. Her warnings had always been dismissed. Now her suffering would be too. Andromache, Hector's widow, watched the city's destruction with the weight of all she had already lost. In her arms she held her young son Astyanax, the last echo of Hector's line, a child whose future could have rebuilt Troy's hope. But prophecy has a cold logic. The Greeks believed no heir of Hector could live. Neoptolemus seized the boy and cast him from the city walls, ending a lineage with a single catastrophic act. Andromache's cries rose with the smoke, a sound that would haunt the memory of Troy for centuries. In another corner of the city, Menelaus found Helen. The woman whose beauty had sparked oaths launched ships and carved the road to this burning night, stood before him untouched by flame. It is said Menelaus lifted his sword to strike her down but faltered. Rage and longing, betrayal and love, all tangled in a single heartbeat. Some say Aphrodite clouded his judgment. Others say he still loved her too deeply to raise his blade. Whatever the truth, Helen survived the fall of Troy and returned to Sparta, a queen once more, yet forever shadowed by the fire that followed her name. But the story did not end with Troy's ashes. From the smoke rose survivors who carried new fates on their shoulders. Aeneas, strong and steady even in despair, gathered his father, his son, and a small band of loyal followers. Guided by omens and the whisper of destiny, he escaped the ruins, beginning a journey that would one day end in Italy, and in the legends that shaped empires yet to come. For the Greeks, victory did not mean peace. Homeward journeys twisted into curses and wanderings. Agamemnon returned only to be murdered by his wife. Ajax the Lesser drowned beneath Athena's wrath. Diomedes was exiled from his own city. Only Odysseus, through suffering and cunning, would eventually reach the shores of Ithaca, after 10 more years carved from trials and longing. The Trojan War did not end with Troy. It splintered into 100 stories. Stories of homecomings, tragedies, new nations, fallen kings. Its flames lit the imagination of poets for centuries, growing into epics that shaped the identity of Greece, and eventually the world. And so, from a single golden apple, to a judgment made in a quiet glade, to a queen leaving her home, to a decade of slaughter, and the burning of a city, this war became more than events. It became memory. It became myth. It became the echo of a world learning that beauty, pride, desire, and fate can bind nations to their doom. Troy burned, but its stories never died. Night settles again, the way it always does when great stories end. The embers dim, the wind carries the last echoes of battle, and what was once a roar becomes a distant hum, fading into the quiet of memory. The Trojan War, with all its shining heroes and grieving mothers, its gods who meddled and mortals who suffered, now drifts back into the ancient darkness from which it came. But its shadow remains. The Greeks never told this story simply to remember a war. They told it to understand themselves, to make sense of pride, loyalty, rage, desire, honour, and the fragile thread that binds human choice to the machinery of fate. In its vast sweep, the war held every kind of sorrow. Fathers burying sons, lovers parted, cities burned, promises kept through blood and loss. And yet, it also held every kind of greatness. Courage in the face of doom, friendship stronger than fear, devotion that carried men through storms and heartbreak. The fall of Troy became a mirror. In its flames, generations saw both the ruin that pride can bring and the strange beauty of the stories born from suffering. Heroes died, kingdoms shattered, but from those ruins rose epics, poems, and memories that shaped cultures and carried their weight across 3,000 years. Now the noise of war fades. The ships are gone, the walls have crumbled. Only a soft silence remains, the kind that invites reflection rather than grief. And somewhere, beneath the quiet earth, Troy still breathes in the stories we carry forward,